true. Virtually nothing was agreed to in that meeting. He says the next day that his negotiators, who were talking about a 20-year moratorium on enrichment of uranium, do not have his support. He says, I've been saying they can't have nuclear weapons, so I don't like the 20 years. I mean, we've never seen this before. Literally a president in public contradicting his negotiators who were negotiating the terms of an agreement just 2 days ago. 3 days later, on April 17th, Trump says that Iran again has agreed to everything, including removing enriched uranium. Trump says our people are just going to go get the uranium, and bring it back to the United States. Within hours, Iran says this is not true. They say we have the right, a sacred right, to enrich uranium on our soil. Trump says his negotiators are not considering releasing sanctions. Two of his negotiators go to the press and say they were talking about releasing sanctions. Again, this is just diplomatic malpractice. The President of the United States and his negotiators arguing with each other in public through the media.
Diplomatic malpractice. That's a senator on the Senate floor describing the sitting President of the United States, in public, contradicting his own negotiators while those negotiators are still at the table. Not after the deal collapsed, while it was supposedly still happening. Trump said Iran agreed to remove enriched uranium. Iran said that is not true. Trump said no sanctions relief. His own negotiators ran to the press and said they were discussing exactly that. This is not a leak. This is not spin. This is a president and his team fighting each other through the media while a war is running. If you want every crack in this story tracked, hit subscribe, because now watch how we got here.
I want to thank my colleague, Senator Baldwin, and others for continuing to bring this debate before the Senate. Again, it's just extraordinary that this is the most significant military action that the United States has taken in decades, and there has yet to be one single hearing, one single debate, one single vote on an authorization of military force. I want to target my remarks today on just what has happened over the past 2 weeks, because we tend to bounce from one news cycle to the next without being able to really connect together the growing incompetence that has defined the management of this war. We shouldn't sugarcoat or normalize this degree of gross, unacceptable incompetence being exercised here. We essentially have a talk show host and a couple real estate developers who are in charge of our war strategy, and we are getting essentially what you would expect if you put a talk show host and a handful of real estate developers in charge of a major Middle East war. If millions of lives weren't at stake, and that's really what's at stake as the global economy threatens to melt down because of rising gas prices and the fact that 1/3 of all fertilizer supply is right now stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. If this wasn't really about millions of lives being at stake, this would be the stuff of farce. One mistake just compounded by another. So many of us believe this war has to end right now because as each mistake gets bigger than the next, the hole for the United States, for American families, for our national security gets deeper and deeper. So I'm literally just going to very quickly run you through what has happened in the last 2 weeks. So we all remember on April 7th when Trump posts on social media that he is going to destroy Iran's entire civilization. He says a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Later that day, he announces that there has been a ceasefire, but within hours, there is essentially diametrically opposed interpretations from Trump and the Iranians as to the terms of that ceasefire. The next day, he puts out a series of posts saying, a big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough. Likewise, so is everybody else. The United States of America will be helping with the traffic buildup in the Strait of Hormuz. There will be lots of positive action. By the end of the day, on April 8th, the ceasefire has fallen apart. Iran says that a ceasefire in Lebanon is also necessary in order to get the Straits of Hormuz opened. Trump is unable to secure that. And so by the end of the day after the ceasefire is announced, the ceasefire no longer exists. 2 days later, on April 10th, Trump sends his vice president, J.D. Vance, to Pakistan for negotiations. On April 11th, those negotiations are concluded after what appears to be an hour or two of face-to-face negotiations. Vance gets right back on a plane after having spent an entire day, one day, negotiating the end of this war to come back to the United States. That day, Trump says, their leadership is dead. Not true. The Strait of Hormuz will soon be open. Not true. The U.S. delegation, led by Vance, comes back to the United States without an agreement. On April 12th, Trump announces, this is the day after the negotiations fall apart, that he's setting up a blockade. So the Iranians have a blockade on the strait. Now Trump announces a layered second blockade. But he's still saying that negotiations are going great. He says the meeting the day before went well. Most points were agreed to, but not the only point that really mattered, nuclear. Of course, that's not true. Virtually nothing was agreed to in that meeting. He says the next day that his negotiators, who were talking about a 20-year moratorium on enrichment of uranium, do not have his support. He says, I've been saying they can't have nuclear weapons, so I don't like the 20 years. I mean, we've never seen this before. Literally a president in public contradicting his negotiators, who were negotiating the terms of an agreement just 2 days ago. 3 days later, on April 17th, Trump says that Iran, again, has agreed to everything, including removing enriched uranium. Trump says, our people are just going to go get the uranium, and bring it back to the United States. Within hours, Iran says this is not true. They say we have the right, a sacred right, to enrich uranium on our soil. Trump says his negotiators are not considering releasing sanctions. Two of his negotiators go to the press and say they were talking about releasing sanctions. Again, this is just diplomatic malpractice. The President of the United States and his negotiators arguing with each other in public through the media.
Here is what Senator Murphy just put on the record. In 2 weeks, Trump announced a ceasefire that Iran immediately contradicted. He said their leadership is dead. Not true. He sent his vice president to Pakistan for a single day. Vance came back with nothing and was sidelined. Trump publicly contradicted his own negotiators over uranium. His own negotiators then went to the press to contradict him back. He announced Vance was heading to Pakistan again, then said Vance was not going. Then the White House confirmed Vance was going. Then it turned out no one was going, because Iran had not agreed to negotiate. And through all of it, Murphy keeps pointing to one fact that nobody in the Republican caucus has answered. There has not been one single hearing, not one vote, not one authorization. The most significant military action the United States has taken in decades, and Congress has been completely cut out. The talk show host and real estate developer's line is going to be clipped. It is going to be replayed. Because it is not just an insult. It is a structural description of who is actually making the decisions. And the record Murphy just laid out makes it difficult to argue he is wrong. Gas prices are up. Fertilizer is locked in the strait. Economies are contracting, and the diplomatic team running this war cannot keep its story straight for 24 hours. That is the record. Murphy put it on the floor, and until someone answers it directly, not with party loyalty, not with process language, not with talking points about strength, it just sits there. Getting worse every day, this continues. If this is landing the way it should, hit subscribe. Because the record is building, and the story is not done.